indeed, and welcome to another Wednesday afternoon, at least on my time scale, on Scrimba. Yes, and today I am welcomed by none other than Michael, Senior Developer.
Hey!
Yes, who is here to talk to us all about how to write good code, because apparently that's actually quite simple in some ways. Yes, learning clean code is one of the best career investments you can make. You can spend just 1 hour with us here today learning the basic principles, and you get to enjoy the rewards across all your code bases, present and future, and past, I guess. Plus, you'll look impressive to potential employers. It's 10 times the payoff for the effort. Yeah, brilliant. In the next hour, Michael here will share his tips on how to write top-notch code, no matter where you are on your development journey. If you're a junior, a mid-level, even a senior, maybe you'll pick up some tips here. Brilliant. Yeah, we're going to hear advice on how to polish your code, make it more professional, easy to read, and less prone to bugs. That's exciting. Yeah, gonna cover how to improve variables, functions, comments, and more, and talk about some common gotchas or bad code practices to avoid. And by the end, you'll be able to improve all your existing and future projects and ensure your code is searchable, readable, and understandable. Isn't that right, Michael?
Sounds too good to be true.
Yeah, well, hopefully it will be true. Oh, look, Emma's here. Emma has previously joined both of us, actually.
Yeah.
A live stream before. Yes, thank you for popping on in. Brilliant. And thank you to all of you for popping in. Very exciting to see you all here. If you have any questions about good code practice, bad code practice, or anything really, drop them in the chat. That's why we do these things live, so that we can answer your questions. Yeah, super excited to hear them. Brilliant. Deadjit wants to know on how to decide a good variable name, which is a great question to start with, because one thing I wanted to talk to you about, Michael, is naming things. It's hard, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah. Naming things is hard. Usually you try your best. That's kind of it. You try to be descriptive. Yeah? You just try to be descriptive. You know, if you've ever written any piece of text, whether at school, university, or any kind of assignment, or, you know, at work, usually when you write a sentence trying to express your thoughts, it's a little bit hard. So you review that sentence once again, you know, so usually it takes a few passes until you find something very descriptive. So, yeah, I would say that at first try to think about what you're trying to describe with that variable, pick a name, and then just move on. And once you have some piece of functionality ready, try to review it once again to maybe you have reassessed something, maybe you have discovered something else, and that will help you to narrow down on the name. Or maybe you picked the right name to begin with, so all good.
Frodo's dropped in. Frodo is a developer at Scrimba. Amazing features for you. Thank you for dropping on in.
Yes.
With the naming things, it's hard thing. I often find myself coming up with really long variable names in a bid to be as descriptive as possible. And I wonder, is that a good thing to do, to have like user joined since 97, currently logged in, or that type of thing?
Well, I mean, again, like a lot of the good practices that I consider clean code and stuff, they're somewhat debatable within the community itself. And it's not like, you know, the more senior you get, all of a sudden you get to this like nirvana place where you always pick the best variable names and stuff. You still keep doing the same. Like you still pick the wrong name and you have to rename it, or sometimes you just get to live with it, or sometimes you just realize it doesn't matter. A lot of it also depends on the conventions that other people already made before you when you join the code base. So sometimes people already picked a particular style for naming things, and you should probably just follow along in some cases. And yeah, like for example, for real world things you can see, like if you go to Kubernetes GitHub account, GitHub repositories, and you pick some of the names and some of the variables and property names, some of them sentence long. So and quite often it's used as like a criticism of the project, that sometimes names are not particularly descriptive or they're too long to understand. So yeah, even most experienced people have very long names. Yeah, so length doesn't particularly matter that much.
Interesting. And what you said about following a convention that's already been set up in your company, that might be difficult sometimes, because if you think it's not really the right thing to do, but it's what the whole company's doing, you kind of have to go with it, right?
Yeah, generally, writing good code, clean code is quite often not about what you think is good and clean, but rather what is the least mentally taxing for people who already work in that code base. So if people are used to a particular workflow, to particular lint rules, to particular setups with that repository, then I would say in 9 times out of 10 you should probably follow it. But if you feel very strongly that something's particularly wrong, obviously you should bring it up and you should mention it. And maybe your team agrees, maybe it's a big problem, maybe it's something that needs to be addressed, and you just work out your way to fixing it.
Yeah, I suppose it might be one of those things where everyone's always kind of on some level thought it's a pain, but never thought much of it, or thought it can be changed. And then you'll be like, maybe we can change it.
Yeah. And very often, sometimes it doesn't matter. So, it's just an opinion, which is fine as well.
Variable names, says Dustin, should scream intent. What does that mean?
Basically, you should let the reader know what the variable is meant to do. So for example, you can say let number equals 5, or instead you can say let restaurant guests equal 5. So you kind of let people know what they're reading. So I think that's, it's a good rule of thumb to have. Yeah.
Good. Thank you for the tip there. Justin, and you, Michael, thank you for your dry humor is asking, should I create click events in JavaScript or HTML? Yeah, so you can either do like button on click and then the function in the HTML, or should you add it in the JS? What do you think?
I think if you're one of those people who works with vanilla JavaScript, you should pick whatever you're happy with. If you want to write in HTML, write in HTML. If I would say your app is JavaScript heavy and you do a lot with event listeners and stuff, probably makes sense to create those events in JavaScript in your JavaScript files rather than bind them in HTML. But I think ultimately it doesn't matter, because once you move on a little bit further on, most jobs nowadays require you to use React, Vue, Angular, and you just don't really write like click events like that in React. So it will all be in JavaScript file for you. Like that decision is made on a framework basis for you. You don't have a choice.
Some people, and I think I agree with this view, say that the HTML should be the structure, the CSS should be the style, and the JS should be the functionality. And according to that, you would have the click events only in the JS.
Yeah, until you go to React and everywhere, everything is in one JSX file, or TSX if you're using TypeScript. Yeah. So.
Very nice question though, dry humor. Dinesh is asking another question, which I plan to ask. Let's have a look.
Good.
Writing readable code is better practice than a smaller number of lines. So the way I phrased it, clean code versus clever code versus readable code. So you have code a lot of the time that you could make shorter because you're a super duper whiz kid and you know how to do all of this in one line, but that might be difficult for other people to understand.
I would say that probably you should try to avoid writing clever code unless it's required of you. Most people would try to say that clean code equals readable code, and to a certain extent that's true. Although again, like let's define definition. Like the clean code itself is a little phrase that was coined by Bob Martin, I think, to just say clean code, and he described a handful of approaches like more. Some people feel it's a bit like, Old Testament 10 commandments for clean code. I would advise against taking those commandments as that religiously. You should probably just take it, read about them, understand that they exist, take them as hints, and use them accordingly. That's kind of, as far as I would say. And then, but again, a lot of people who disagree with some aspects of clean code, they would say that clean code and readable code are different, in which case I would probably pick readable code, then clean code, then cloud code. Yeah, but although, again, if you participate in, there are competitions, coding competitions, where you have to write a program in the least number of lines, in which case clever code is obviously the way to go.
Yes, here
I think it's called Coding Golf or something like that. Yeah.
Here are the
chapters from the
the rules, I suppose.
Yeah.
From Bob Martin. Yeah, meaningful names, as we just covered. Yes.
There you go.
And then we talked about functions, formatting. More important than you think. Michael's hot on formatting, aren't you?
Well, I suppose, yeah. Well, in Scrimba editor, I am, because I kind of have preferences for a particular format style, and Scrimba editor doesn't have automated formatting. But once I onboard on the project, for example, that has JavaScript linter and prettifier config already done, I just press Command S and that's it. I don't really care if it's got semicolons or it has got tabs, spaces, whatever. Don't really care. Command S, if it's done, it looks formatted, I'm happy.
Yeah, that is a good point. We'll come to a little bit later, but first, the comments are flooding in. Where to start? Rockstar says, I like add event listener better than the unclick on the HTML, going back to where to add the event listeners. I agree to you. Oh, look at this. Froda had an issue today where we had two types of user to keep track of. Const user equals Scrimba user and const D user equals Discord user. Now Doozer looks like a typo. How would you name them?
I would just say Discord user, Discord _ user, and then Scrimba _ user. Yeah, I like very explicit names. Because Sousa and Doozer will lose context very quickly. Yeah. But I don't think you get any more precise name than Scrimba user or Discord user.
Yes, indeed. I'm struggling to understand the difference between local storage and session storage.
I would say that I'll probably hint towards reading about sessions, what they are, what their whole point is, and then from there I think it would be much easier to understand the difference between session storage or local storage. I'll leave it at that because I don't like giving the answer straight away because satisfaction comes from finding things yourself. Totally.
Yes. Where to submit these questions? Type them in the chat.
Yeah.
Go for it. Yes. Brilliant.
Or there. I don't know. If you're on LinkedIn, where is it? Up there?
I don't know.
Somewhere.
I don't know if they have it. No, they do have it on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yes. Somewhere around the screen.
Going back to naming things, Root is asking the best practice for naming functions. Now, if you've watched our Friday live stream, you see we have a lot of fun naming functions.
Yeah, it's kind of a given that, well, not really a given, but it's more of a convention to name them as verbs. So like there's action words, I suppose. That's kind of the definition of a verb. So you do something with a function. So it should have a verb in the name of it. So for example, submit something or express something or perform some action
or whatever.
Yeah.
Yes. And what about the casing on that?
It's kind of language specific. Some languages already have preferred methods. Again, most of our programming is kind of like walking into a room,
the room.
You kind of read the room, like read the conventions that people already use in that programming language and just follow them. Because like in JavaScript you start lowercase, in Python I think you have also lowercase, but it's kind of cased with, I think it's like kebab case, I think it's called.
Some of them are all caps.
Yeah, all caps and like C# and stuff. So it's, you know, things like casing is usually, just take convention from your language and that's it. Don't think about it too much.
Good. Fun hat. Says, should functions only do one thing? Now, this is something that's bandied about quite a lot.
Yeah. You know, people start arguing about what's a thing and what constitutes one, and then there are arguments like that. I think if you can do one thing with a function, sure, go for it. If you have to do more than one, it kind of depends. So, like, for example, take a simple case of submitting a form. So you say, you know, click on the button, you wire it up, and you say submit form. That's it. But that submit form, it does one thing, but at the same time, underneath, lots of other people would say, well, it doesn't really do one thing. It collects data from form, it puts it into some kind of data structure, then it pushes it to the server. So it actually does three things. So people start kind of getting bogged down into that kind of semantics. I think if you keep your functions relatively straightforward and also you provide commentary around it, if something is not particularly clear, then it should be fine. So if you have to do one thing and you can do one thing, sure. But if you have to do a little bit more, I don't think that's a particular concern.
Yes, that's our cat. Evil coder, crikey. Says, I have finished the front-end course, which
is congratulations.
Indeed, Scrimba's front-end career path. Wondering what to do next. Well, last week I added this scrim here. Congratulations on completing the front-end developer career path. And in that scrim are some suggestions of what to study next. So go check it out. I hope that helps. Don't use it for evil things. Evil coder. Okay. Next question. Yeah. You mentioned comments.
Yes.
To comment or not to comment?
Yes, I think personally, I think you should comment, especially to clarify. Someone previously mentioned that variables should give intent, and I think that variable, like comments, they should provide context around a certain decision. So if you just write fairly standard on-click event, there's not really much to comment there. Or if you're writing a node server function, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like there's no need for that. But if you require something is a little bit unusual or something feels a little bit hacky, then you should probably leave a comment to explain why a certain decision was made. Or for example, if there is like a value, just a random number assigned to something and you don't know why. Like if someone reads it, try to be a little bit compassionate to the other person, like who reads it later after you. If they imagine in their shoes, so you come to this code, you read it, all of a sudden there is this number that you have no explanation for. So like drop a link in the comment to the ticket that prompted for this number, or this particular fix, or this particular workaround and stuff. So leave as many breadcrumbs for other people as you can. And I think comments for that are particularly useful. Also, don't forget to remove comments. If all of a sudden you stumbled on a comment, it makes no sense. You ask your team around, what's this even about? If nobody knows anything, remove the comment. So it's easier not to have that confusion. Or if the comment describes a piece of code underneath it, and the piece of code does something completely different to what the comment is describing,
yeah, I've seen that.
Then remove that comment. Remove that comment, or maybe update the code, or try to leave the place slightly cleaner than when you found it.
Yes, that's the. Did I just turn on Siri? I hope not. That is the Scout.
Yeah, I think it's called the Scout role
Thingy, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I've never been to Scouts.
No, me neither, obviously. Yes, on that. So ideally, the code will make sense on its own.
Ideally.
If not, well, maybe you do get situations where it can't really be explained in its own. One thing that sticks in my mind is a regex, for example. I mean, very few people on this planet I think, can read a regex and be like, bam, I know what that does. So just leave a comment for something like that.
That's true. Yeah, I just go to actually even regex explain. I paste that into the website. There is regexp.com, like regex explain. And then I just paste the link to explanation of that regex in there. So whoever reads it and goes, what does this do? They just paste it in and read through the explanation on the website.
So you don't even have to explain it yourself.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there are tools that kind of already help you. Or for example, you're writing a bash script and a particular command is a little bit involved and nasty. So yeah, there is Explain Shell website. And then you can just paste that link to it, and whoever reads it can click on it, have a look, have a read.
Yeah. What about if there's something that seems like it's obvious you should do, you try it, it doesn't work, or there's some kind of glitch with something else in the code base, so you have to revert it? Would you put a comment in to say, I've tried this?
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah, I would probably. I would normally try to put a comment or write a note in docs or like a comment in the Notion documentation or something to just say, when you get to this stage, don't forget to do X, Y, Z, or just signpost things for someone else. Because if you have made that mistake, there is a chance that someone else might make the same mistake.
Yes.
So you either make it better or you try to warn others off if you can't make it better.
Some people like to use comments for visual markers like this.
Yes.
Particularly in CSS, I think, but maybe in other things as well.
Yeah, in like scripts. I've seen a lot of things like that in scripts as well.
Well, some people say this is bad code practice. What do you think?
I would say that if I saw that in JavaScript, like say an admin class like that, like what we have at the bottom of the screen, line 17, 18, I think that's a bit unnecessary. But quite often, in JavaScript, it's a little bit easy to navigate in code. So like you can hit F12 on your editor and it will bring you to the things. So this is now unnecessary. But with some scripts, like for example, PowerShell scripts are quite hard to navigate. So sometimes they create you a visual marker in the file. So for example, the script can be very long, like 500 lines or something. And on your right-hand side in VS Code, there is usually like a map overview of the whole file. So what I've seen some people do is they basically create ASCII art to write things in large letters. Yeah, exactly. So you can navigate this file much easier. So when you scroll down massive file, on your right hand side on the map overview of the file, you can see like, here is this part, here is that part, and so on. So yeah, I found that quite helpful. I think it kind of depends on the situation. You have to be a little bit creative, if it helps people, then sure, why not?
Yeah. That's our cat ringing the bell.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yes.
Just walked into the door.
Wow, so many wonderful questions. I'll move on to another question here from Anna. What about following the style guide? For example, Google, Airbnb, etc. Things that they're out there on the internet for one to use. Do you have a preferred one, or the most easy one for beginners to get started with? Good question.
Interesting. I think like when I had a chance to pick, we ended up picking Airbnb. But to be honest, most of the time it's already picked for you, and you just go along with it. Honestly, I don't have a preference for either of them. If I were to pick, again, there are also, when you pick a style guide like that, most of the time you have just the defaults, and then you can create your own overrides after the style guide. So whichever you pick, if you're not happy with something, you can always just go along and just create an override for it. That will make you much more comfortable to you. Like if you're the only person who works on that, pick whatever you prefer. So I personally would go with Airbnb, but to be honest, I don't even remember what it involves now. I just remember that I used to pick it in the past.
Yep. Anna likes to add comments in places where I applied something new. So this is a comments from a learner's perspective. Well, really, I mean, you never stop being a learner as a developer, do you? So when you review it a few days later, you don't have to do the whole massive Google search again. That is a very good point. How many times have you Google searched and seen like you've clearly clicked the link before? Yeah. And you're like, yes, very nice point there. Thank you very much indeed. Yes. Let's talk commit messages. Now, there's a whole big thing about commit messages, isn't there? Because I think a lot of people might fall into the habit of saying something like fixed or bug squashed or something like that. How do you write a commit message which is actually worth writing, I guess?
So I think it kind of depends on the workflow that you have with your team as well. Quite often, if your team, for example, commits straight to like a branch and then it's pull requested to master, then you can discuss, are we merging all of the commits or are we squashing the commits? If you decide that you squash all the commits, then you just have a branch name that is probably already templated for you. People have particular preference for like naming of branches, and then you name PR. Then when you squish and merge, the name of that PR becomes your commit on the main branch, and that's kind of it. It's fairly straightforward. And in that case, you can name your commit anything you want, obviously within reason. But quite often, if you have to debug some issue, there's not really more meaningful than try number 1, try number 2, try number 3, and so on. But again, try to squash them afterwards. But if you can, like if you, for example, working on your own, you can commit straight to the main branch. So you just go ahead and try to be descriptive about what changes you've made. Some people like to prefix them with like, is it a fix? Is it a feature? Is it some particular release or something? So you try to prefix it to be descriptive. Just go ahead. I think most of the time it's usually having again, you have a conversation with people you work with and you come up with some ground rules that all of you kind of agree on, and that's it.
Paulo asks, what if I need to create a function to donate to a dodo? Is dodo donation a good name? So I think it's a slightly amusing question.
No,
it does
I think,
make an interesting point.
I think it's a pretty good one.
Sometimes when you put words together in a function.
So I think that when you say do dodo donation, that already tells you that. When you have to use something like do, donation as a noun has a verb to it. So do donation, i.e. donate. So you can do that, and then, who do you donate to? You donate to Dodo. So you just call it donate to Dodo.
Yeah, I hope that helps.
Because do Dodo donation is also a bit of a mouthful. And typo prone as well. So donate to Dodo is probably better. Yeah. Also, have a think about it. Is Dodo really the only one you're going to donate to? Maybe you should just call it donate and then take Dodo or whoever you're donating it to as an argument.
Yeah, that is a very good point.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paolo, for the thought-provoking.
Good question.
Thought-provoking, slightly prehistoric question.
Yeah. I mean,
lovely.
Is your target market even real?
Well, it might be the preserving a dodo fossil. There's one in the Oxford Museum.
True.
Yes. Do you know about Svelte?
My blog is actually written in Svelte, but I don't know much about it.
Because Nicholas is asking, sending a post request to my supabse server, can I use a function in the client or should I always use an endpoint?
I think that's a slightly further version. I think he's talking about SvelteKit. I'm not familiar with SvelteKit, so I'm afraid I can't answer that because I haven't used SvelteKit. I used it before it was turned into the framework.
It is. Head on over to Stack Overflow or the Scrimba Discord server.
Sorry, but props to you for using supabse. It's really good.
Is it?
Yeah, it's really cool.
Good. Kofi asks, for someone deciding to learn JavaScript, would you recommend starting straight from ES6? Now with this, is there any way you can not start with ES6 these days? It's kind of so ingrained that if you're learning JavaScript, you're basically learning ES6.
Yeah, the questions about interview questions about do you know ES6? It's a bit like, have you used Windows 98? Yes, but also it's so old now that people kind of moved on. Yeah, there are other features that are newer, and I feel like ES6 with new arrow functions, and array methods and stuff, it's just common practice now. So yeah, just go ahead, just learn JavaScript, and by doing that you will learn ES6, ES7 and so on. Maybe not the latest ones, but you will definitely learn ES6, ES7, ES8, although I don't remember what's in ES8.
If anything, if there is any ES8.
No, there must be, yeah.
Is there? Anyway, yes, basically it's very, I think, hard to learn anything pre-ES6 these days.
Yeah.
I hope that helps. Next question. Magic numbers. What are magic numbers, Mike?
Magic number is basically when you have a number that is not derived from some kind of config value or something. It's just a random number in code base. So as we previously discussed, for example, like guest, restaurant guest equals 5. Why is it 5? And so on. So usually people try to avoid magic numbers because they're kind of very specific. They're a bit arbitrary. So there are numbers like, for example, pi, it's a mathematical constant, and it's fairly explanatory why that's the case. So with, I think Dan, you want to share the screen to show.
I do.
Yeah, there we are. So like we have orbital period, for example, function to calculate orbital period. And then, so you have these values would be like, for example, 6, 3, 6, 7, 4, 4, 7. It would be an example of a magic number because
this actually means something that most people don't know offhand.
Exactly.
What it is. The same with this. So
that's right.
If you could rename them, save them in variables, really. It turns out this 6367 is the radius of the Earth.
There you go.
Who knew? So you can then
I'll probably even leave a comment after that to say that it in kilometers.
Or would it be better to call it Earth radius in km?
Yeah, I suppose you can. Yeah, I suppose you can.
Yes. So anyway, if you find yourself with a number which I guess isn't going to change, but it's not obvious to most people what it would be, save it in a variable, and then it's clear to everyone if you've named your variable correctly. Yeah.
Exactly. And it doesn't apply just to magic numbers. It also applies to magic strings and so on. So quite often, if you just have random strings scattered around as arguments to something, it probably is better to explain what the string is, where it comes from. Is it, it could be like a hi, random phrase, random translation, and so on. So quite often, a lot of strings, when you have to write front-end applications, you then have to think about usage internationally. So your button click in English will be something else in French, in German, and so on. So you
click, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. Push, I don't know. So quite often you will have to then basically take that string out and then reuse it as like button dot click, and that then gets picked up from the language in the browser and so on the setting that then propagates further in. So kind of like magic strings you will have to get rid of pretty much everything magically stringed in your app to you to be properly translated.
Yes, thank you for clearing that up. Let's talk about how to approach refactoring.
Ooh.
How does this happen with you? Is it something you kind of have time to just go through your code base and refactor it? How do you avoid making problems refactoring something and then messing it up for someone else? Basically, what do you do?
Yeah, so usually in a lot of code bases, you try to, like, what is refactoring? It's usually you have a piece of code and you're trying to make it better in some aspect. So you try to improve readability, or you're trying to improve speed, performance of that code, or you're trying to improve some metric that you can measure possibly. Or maybe like you have just one gigantic function that does everything, and you think, oh, I should probably try to like abstract some things. Maybe, like for example, getting rid of magic numbers in your code. That is part of refactoring. So refactoring is trying to improve your code on one objective metric. So usually it's a part of testing. So when you are trying to write some code, you try to write some test that will presumably test your piece of code. And it's like this mantra of red, green, refactor. So you write a test, it fails, then you write the piece of code, the test passes, so green, and then you refactor. So once you have that test, you can now improve your code. And when you change that code, your test will verify that you have not become red again. So you go straight to green, hopefully. It's kind of in theory, but quite often it's a little bit more involved than that in practice.
Yes.
So, but yeah, that's how you kind of do it. You have some kind of safety net of your test to help you refactor.
That's interesting that you bring up testing, because that was going to be my next point.
Ooh.
Yes, the importance of testing. We have on Scrimba
Unit testing.
A unit testing course. Yes, very
good.
nice. And you'll see here when Michael says green, it's actually already passing, which is great news. When it doesn't pass, basically all of this is red. So it uses Jasmine, but there are other test suites, which basically adds all of this styling so you can write your tests. And I'm not explaining very well, but if your code works,
you get some feedback. Yeah,
you get feedback quite. And unit testing course is here.
Very good. Yeah, so kind of unit testing is one of the tests. So you start with unit test, and then you kind of have a Google about testing pyramid. So you kind of move from the test that tests the smallest piece of your functionality towards the whole app and so on. So you can even write end-to-end tests that, for example, load the page, call an API, log in, log out, that kind of stuff. So they kind of behave like users in that way. So yeah, quite common in a lot of code bases.
Very nice. And let's have a look at common bad practices, Michael.
Ooh.
Anything stands out that you want to tell people not to do? I know one you're going to say.
Go on.
Calling button BTN.
I wanted to say one-letter variables, but that would be that would be just JavaScript specific. Because
so, like in this example here, the before example has like const a.
Yeah. So
Don't do that.
one letter variable, unless you're writing maths code, in which case A, B, C, they're like common, sides of triangle, for example. They will be common one-letter variable. So again, you see, it kind of all depends on the convention of the space that you're working in. For example,
generally, these are not descriptive enough, are they? So.
Yeah. Generally,
Yes.
try to avoid it. Like for example, on the other hand, Golang uses one-letter variables quite extensively. It's kind of the community. It's a thing that people do in that language. So it doesn't apply. So bad practices in some languages, what is considered bad practices in one language might be just a common thing that everyone is used to in another language. So like, for example, people say that Ruby is a bit too magical, and then other languages are a bit more explicit, like Golang. And some people say that magic in Golang is bad, equally, explicitness in Ruby is bad. So it all depends on where you're at. But yeah, generally I would say, if it's hard to read or it's convoluted, that's usually the most common bad practice. The most common bad practice is what spends you days trying to understand what the code does. Also, I would say bad practice is if you're not confident enough whether that you can make a change. So for example, if you have huge, million-line code base and there are no tests in it, that's a very
Sounds
bad
bad.
practice. Yeah. So usually bad practices that are not really about small clean code bits, but they are more usually a bit more massive organizational problems. Like for example, no continuous integration, continuous delivery framework, or methods to release, or there is no process around it, or for example, not using source control like GitHub or GitLab and so on. Like developers email code to each other. What? Like in the past, it used to be like that before invention of Git. So yeah, people would email code to each other, but they didn't have better tools. But nowadays we do. It's kind of like driving drunk or without the seatbelt on. People used to do it, but they don't do it anymore. So obviously, doing the same thing now would be a bad practice.
I want to talk a bit about how to make code searchable, which is a good practice.
Ooh.
So going back to our example here,
Yeah.
So we discovered that this is the radius of the Earth.
Yeah.
But if for some reason later on down the line you want to, for some reason, find the radius of the Earth in the code, unless you know what it is, there's no way you can search for it as it currently is, which is another reason to save it in a variable. Yeah,
that's right. So you improve, good naming also helps you. Good naming is kind of very non-descriptive. I would say that when you're trying to name things in a bit more common way, a little bit more intuitively, what would most people look for when they need to make a change? What kind of name would they search for? So that's why applying these patterns. So even though you can walk into the code base and, for example, they don't say var button, they say var btn. That's why if you all of a sudden walk into that code base and start writing your own preferred way, that will bring problem to searchability and stuff. So that's why kind of the whole linter and formatting issues, why they're all enforced, is that consistency releases ability to ease cognitive load on you as someone who wants to make a change or someone who wants to fix something. So the last thing you want is, for example, you have an alert or something, there is an emergency, you need to make a change, you need to make a fix, but instead you're just bogged down in
finding stuff.
3, 4, 5 versions of spelling button or something. Someone made a typo, someone spelled it BTN, someone spelled it the whole thing, someone capitalized it, someone didn't, that kind of stuff. So you want to limit the amount of how many different ways you do things.
But what if your company is doing something which you find completely crazy? Like they always call buttons const elephant. Do you just have to go along with that? Do you just have to live with that?
I mean, realistically, nobody is going to call buttons elephants unless those buttons shaped like elephants, in which case it kind of makes sense.
No, but historically they might have been shaped like elephants, but they're not anymore. They've always called it elephant, so it's legacy code.
Yeah,
it happens.
Actually, that's a very good, somewhat simplified, but a realistic scenario. But yes, at some point it did look like an elephant, but it's not longer an elephant. Probably it depends what your aim is. Sometimes making those changes would be just far too time consuming, and the company that you work for, the business that you work for, just doesn't care about it. It's like they don't care what it's named because it doesn't affect their bottom line. It doesn't affect how they make money, and you just walking in there and going like, look, you need to spend months of work on renaming these buttons. And the executives and your manager will just look at you like you're mad, because why would we waste all of our time, resource, and money on fixing something that nobody cares about, apart from a few developers on the team that realistically you can try to get over it. So if you can prove that this change will make a difference to the bottom line, improve the business and improve some practice, or it's a block of something else, but if it's just a visual change because it doesn't sit right or something, I don't think that would be a compelling enough argument to make that change.
Yeah, but then if they suddenly go on a big hiring spree and they've got 50 new devs in one go and none of them understand that elephant equals button, then they're going to regret not doing some housekeeping.
I mean, if they have enough money to do that, then probably they have enough momentum behind the organizational change to clean up the code base, in which case you're not going to be arguing about it.
You'd hope. On to some questions. Evil Coder is asking, which should we use, innerHTML or innerTEXT or append?
Interesting. I think it kind of depends on your use case. These functions exist in JavaScript because they have very particular use case. innerHTML, you just need to remember what is the potential for pitfall of innerHTML is that you can append HTML code inside of your HTML that you might not know about. So for example, you store some HTML in the database, you let other users submit it, and nothing stops them from submitting some JavaScript within that HTML that has some vulnerability or connects some servers to pass the information and so on. So when you use innerHTML, you are vulnerable to cross-site script attacks. And kind of you need to be mindful about the risks when you use it. That's why in React, innerHTML is not called innerHTML, it's called dangerously set in innerHTML. It kind of hints you that what you're trying to do is not so safe. But if you know what you're doing, you have sanitized that HTML, or you're the only one who wrote it, then sure, go ahead. Otherwise, I would probably go for innerTEXT. So if somebody supplies you with some inputs, try to strip them of anything meaningful of HTML tags and so on. So try to use sanitization libraries and stuff. Or just use text.
Yeah. And Farhat says, should you use automation frameworks alongside your unit tests like Cypress and Selenium?
Yes.
I was hoping you'd expand on that.
Yeah.
What are these? What do they do?
Cypress is kind of like end-to-end testing library, and Selenium is like a test runner. So yeah, basically they are all to expand like what we talked about, testing pyramid, where you have unit tests, integration tests, acceptance tests, end-to-end tests, and so on. So they're all libraries that help you to basically expand what you're testing. So with unit tests, you can test a function. So you have input, output, function gives you some results. But what if you need to test how two functions interact? You might write another unit test. Or you can write, for example, how would my application interact with my database? So you can write another test. Or how would the user interact with my website? And you write another test. So all of these different levels of tests, they have different names for them. And sometimes people have the same name for different things, as usual in software. But try to, when you have a chat with people at your company, try to come together to the same terms. Like, what do you call XYZ? Like, what do you call unit test? What do you call integration test? And then through these discussions, you will learn some common middle ground or your approaches, and then you'll just move along with that.
Good. In the end, going back to our variable naming discussion, Frodo and the team opted for Discord user, as it was in Discord context. And Scrimba_user for the Scrimba user.
Hey!
So not Doozer and Sousa.
Yes.
Good choice. Enrique is asked, How do you advise to face a project that is plagued by bad practices? So like we were talking about our buttons, which were shaped like elephants, so they got called elephant, but now they're not shaped like elephants. Stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, it's quite often it's like, how do you face buying a car that is a bit clapped out? It kind of depends on your personal circumstances, who you buy it from, what car it is. There are so many variables to it. You know, it's like, what's your budget? You know, can you afford to fix that clapped out car? Or do you kind of have to drive it? Do you not really have a choice? So sometimes you don't really have a choice. Like if you're a consultant, you've been hired to bolt a new feature onto something and you've got 1 month contract, you probably don't really care about that project. You just do your thing and you move on. That's it. You know, you don't have time to refactor that code base for 6 months. So yeah, things change like that. And also kind of people usually talk about bus factor. It's like if you get run over by a bus, who will? So try to, you know, when you're trying to refactor things and when you're trying to make things better, try to keep them limited and very scoped to certain things, because you never know. Like, you know, the bus is just around the corner sometimes.
So you're saying you shouldn't make it so that it can't survive without you, kind of thing.
Yeah, you shouldn't start changes that you might not see through the end. Yeah, ideally. But sometimes it's not possible either. Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes the end comes. That's it. A bit morbid end to the question. But there you go. Hopefully helps.
Moving on.
Yeah, moving on.
I think actually not moving on. Maybe focus on the things that are going to have the most impact. There might be something in the code base which really annoys you, like buttons called elephants. But actually, to the end user, it's going to make zero difference if you do fix it, or even to the developers. In the end, might not make that much
I
difference.
mean, if you buy a clapped out car and you have a massive dent in the door, and at the same time the engine doesn't start, like pick your battles.
Pick your battles, exactly. Words to live by. Anna says, I've heard TypeScript helps you to write better code. At what point is it good to start learning it?
Kind of generic answer is after JavaScript. So try to get a little bit comfortable with JavaScript at first, and then
before or after React. What doesn't matter?
No, I don't think it matters because well, quite frankly, you can learn JavaScript and then, for example, you can think, oh, I might want to go to, I might want to learn some Node and backend. In which case, you might as well use TypeScript in there too, right? So yeah, I'll probably say after JavaScript. But applicably to Scrimba students, I think it's like the modules, when you pass the career path, when you end the career path, so you've learned HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you learned a little bit of React, you built some projects, and then you can probably, after the end of the career path, look into TypeScript. Yeah.
Sounds good. What is the best state management, Redux or Valtio? I've never heard of Valtio.
Well, I've never heard of Valtio either. It's been a while since I worked with state management in React. So I worked with Redux before. It's okay. It's got it in. I think if you work with it, it helps you kind of learn a little bit of functional approach and like this one-directional Redux flow. I think it would be very useful to learn that. But again, like if it's not in your job, don't bother. Yeah, because context in React is more than enough for most applications that you're going to build for your portfolio.
Good. Adult teachers finally will settle an argument we have every week on our Friday live stream. Thank you for bringing this up, adult teachers. Is it wrong to call buttons BTN? Why/why not? So for those of you who've never seen our Friday live stream, give you some context here. What we do is we code on a Friday. Yes. For example, this Friday, we will be coding a vacation planner. And nearly every week, I call a button const BTN. And every week, Michael says it should be BUTTON. So, what is the answer? Why is it wrong to call it BTN, Michael?
Like, I think wrong here is mostly I don't like it. That's kind of it. If by the definition of wrong, is it morally abominable? I don't think so. Is
Good.
it?
I'm glad.
But yeah, I just prefer the whole word explicitly, because again, like when we discuss searchability and stuff, like what is the first thought that puts into your head, like, oh, I need to find a particular button in the code base, and you search for button. It's also HTML name, so the whole HTML tag is called button. It's not called BTN. So it's just a little bit more commonplace, I would say.
More searchable, maybe.
Yeah.
That's food for thought. I hope that clears that up.
Mm-hmm.
Adult teachers. Yes, very good. Evil Coder is also asking where to find good SVG tags logo.
No idea.
I don't know. Oh, I did have one, but now I don't remember it. Icon Monster, I believe it's called.
Icon Monster.
I'm not sure if this is totally what you had in mind, Evil Coder, but you can get some very nice, icons, all sorts.
Oh, right.
I don't know what that one's trying to convey. But anyway, yes, and you could download them as PNGs and SVGs. Okay. So maybe that will help. I hope so.
Fair enough. Oh yeah, also Tailwind CSS has a library that you can use for icons.
There's also Google Material icons.
Yeah.
I don't know what they are, if they're SVGs or what. But anyway, Google Material icons, quite nice. And they've made it slightly more usable as well.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
What if in HTML6 they change it to BTN? Here's hoping. Although I guess that would break the whole internet.
And that's why they won't. So if you call your buttons full word, you can sleep safely.
Your code, says Simon, should be as neat and tidy as Leanne's, Bob, and Michael's buzz cut. Yay! Excellent advice.
Yes, very good.
Are there any Scrimba courses that focus on accessibility? We don't have an accessibility course, but instead we put accessibility advice, I guess.
Yeah, we have a couple of
into
streams.
the courses. And there is also a stream, yes.
Yeah, we have a couple of streams on YouTube somewhere in the channel. Search for accessibility.
Accessibility. YouTube?
Yeah, or just apparently if you Google, there you go. If you just Google Scrimba accessibility, you'll find our searches.
That's good. Here it is. Yes, you can check out this stream.
There you go. Very efficient.
Indeed. Yes. Wow. Do we have time for one more question? Yes, we do.
Sure.
What's the difference, Michael, between junior code and senior code?
Ooh, interesting. Again, it's an opinion, I think. But I think junior code usually covers happy paths. So you just kind of have, the happy path as in, here is the input, what is the required successful output, and that code just blasts through it. While senior code is a little bit more around the error codes and stuff. Although some people might argue that mid-level developers should do that as well. I think senior code is also a little bit more focused on the overall picture of what business is trying to achieve with that code. So there is a bit more intent behind it. But that's mainly because more experienced people have a little bit more familiarity with tools in a way. And they're a little bit more intentful about what they're trying to do.
Good. Lovely. Thank you for clearing that up. And that's all we have time for today. But thank you for dropping on by.
Oh wow, an hour has passed. Flew.
Yes.
I think
it
that
has
just picked
gone
up
extremely fast. But don't worry, we are back on
In
Right,
47 hours, it says.
In 47 hours. That's actually wrong.
Is it?
It's 48 hours.
May 20th.
Yeah, because
It's
it's
on Friday.
5 o'clock on Friday. But anyway, it knows what time it is. It's a bug in YouTube's code. Yes, we are going to be making a vacation planner. Looking forward to that. So come along and remind us of our own clean code tips on Friday.
Oh, I think it's 47 hours dot 59 minutes. And they just rounded it down.
It could be. Not the most accurate. But anyway,
Oh,
yes, see you all very, very soon. Thank you for coming. It has been wonderful.
yes.
Any closing thoughts?
See you later, everyone.
I was hoping for something profound about
No.
clean code.
No, nothing profound from me. I suppose, yeah, just, keep your opinions. What is it called? There's this phrase like, strong opinions loosely held, I think people like to say. So, just be very strong about what you think and like know why you think what you know. But at the same time, always keep your mind open to change.
Indeed. Thank you for that. See you all soon. Bye.